Hi everyone, how you doing? How's that? Is that testing fine? Yep. My name's Beck. This is Joyce and Sam, and we're excited to speak to you guys about the topic of investing in the right NFT project. I think before we kind of dive into the topic itself, we'll just go through the panel and get a bit of background on what both you guys are working on and kind of how you've been introduced into Web3.
Okay, maybe I'll go first. My name is Joyce Lai. I'm actually launching a project called Charisma Social. Outside of that, I am in a play-to-earn gaming DAO called Ready Player DAO. We are a play-to-earn guild. We do access scholarships, and we also do investments in this space. Prior to that, actually an attorney by training. So I was at Consensus as one of their legal counsel for about 4 years.
Nice.
And I'm Sam Rosen. I'm a finance professor at Temple University. And the reason I'm here is that I find the NFT market a very interesting market, especially a place where we can study classic finance questions with really great data. And so I have one paper right now. I plan to write more in this space, but our first paper studies the outperformance of experienced investors relative to inexperienced investors, which is on the order of about 7 percentage points per trade. But we don't stop there. We try to understand how and why they're able to achieve return outperformance. Part of that being understanding what types of collections they invest in. So hopefully I'll have a chance to talk more details about that in this panel.
Awesome. And my name is Beck Jones. I am the CEO and co-founder of Clutch Wallet. Clutch is a cryptocurrency wallet that's focused on onboarding the next 10 million women into the world of Web3. We have a big focus on integrated education and building out more of a social feed within our wallet experience. So that's my background. Let's get into the panel. So I thought maybe just to set the room and the scene for anyone that's new into the world of crypto, you've probably been hearing about NFTs for the last couple of days, but I thought I'd just start with like a bit of a rolling definition that you guys can feel free to add to as I kind of get into it. But I do like to think of NFTs as a technology that wraps itself around digital, and now we're starting to see more physical goods and stores of value. It gives the owner of the NFT the inherent, I guess, unique ownership within that particular value that the technology has been wrapped around. And I think the beauty of smart contracts is that there's so much more that can be written into what that value capture is. So if we think about purchasing a ticket to an event that is purchased as an NFT, you might get perks beyond that. That could be meeting with the artists themselves or having some kind of merch that's also a part of the purchasing process there. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to add into that kind of definition of what an NFT is?
Yeah, so I think NFTs is definitely like the token itself is the digital asset, but I always think of these types of token standards, right? Whether it's ERC 721 or ERC 20 or any other number, as really a file format. I really think all of this should have been called a file format from like the legal perspective. But so, you know, NFTs I think are really amazing because it is a standard that we're now all basically adopting and agreeing to how this information is moving between different protocols and different networks, right? So yes, while the token itself is the asset, but I also think we need to keep in mind that we now have a way for all these different systems to communicate with each other, which is super exciting.
So I think one thing I can add here, and let me first say that my work and my research focuses on the profile picture collections. And so I present my work a lot to my academic colleagues who, are a risk-averse bunch, so there's not a lot of people who know what NFTs are. And my simple explanation is that they're digital status goods. They're goods where you can show them off on your Twitter profile and other settings, and they also give you access to exclusive events or groups or kind of other types of access. And I think once you have it from that mindset, kind of we're able to proceed with kind of a more investigation of returns or values because we at least have a sense for, okay, we know there's goods like this in other markets, and NFTs just happen to be traded on the blockchain.
Awesome. So I think that at times the NFT market as a whole can sometimes get a bit of a bad rap. There's been a lot of rug pulls in the last kind of 12 months. And I think, Sam, some of your research has kind of distilled what a good investment into NFTs looks like. And can you share maybe a little bit more around what you've kind of found from that research?
Definitely. So, I think one of the reasons I'm on this panel, this topic, how to choose investments, is as part of our research in terms of understanding, relative return performance among groups of investors, is we actually document that a very important variable in determining whether or not a collection is going to be successful is whether or not you see experienced investors involved in the minting phase. And I guess I haven't defined this yet. Experienced investors, we always think kind of backward looking, look at the wallets that have minted or traded in lots of collections, and from our perspective, okay, they know the space pretty well. And so given that there's this variable that can help produce or at least predict success for a collection, we take a step back and we say, all right, well, what characteristics of the collections do these experienced wallets tend to gravitate towards? And there we have a few kind of aspects that seem to jump out, which is that experienced investors tend to like projects where there's an artist who's associated with it, and that artist has, I guess you'd say, a reputation outside of just the project itself. And then some things that experienced investors tend not to like, in the sense that they predict lower participation, things actually like having a roadmap, which you think might not be a big issue, but a roadmap perhaps signals, okay, this is maybe a project that just put together a roadmap and is trying to kind of piggyback off of other projects that have similar visions. And given that that's something that's kind of easy to produce and doesn't necessarily give a credible signal of quality, it's something that experienced investors shy away from. Now, those are just a few features. We're kind of limited as researchers because we can only measure and quantify what we can. But at least that's something that kind of tells you a little bit about what experienced investors are looking for in a project.
Joyce, anything to add on there with regards to investing in NFTs and maybe some of the indicators as to what a good project would look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of the NFTs, like especially when it's starting out, is based on really just a reputation of the team. So I think as with any other type of investing, you have to look into the fundamentals of whether the people behind it have experience, whether they are promising things that are achievable or not, based just on common sense. I think just bringing your common sense in all of this is really useful, and obviously, stay diversified, because you never know what's going to happen. You should never overcommit yourself or over allocate yourself in any one of anything, really.
Yeah, for sure. I come from a background of kind of marketing and social, and so I have somewhat of a unique take on, I guess, looking at a project before it's kind of launching and starting to look at some of those kind of more social and marketing indicators that can be helpful. And I think an interesting trend that I've noticed in the last 12 months is how many kind of influencers are getting on board and celebrities that are starting to attach their names to different projects. And I think traditionally that would be like a really strong indicator for a project, because it meant that you were going to reach a scale of an audience of maybe that celebrity's kind of followership. But I think the last 12 months have shown how there's been a number of celebrities that have attached their names and brands to different projects that still haven't been successful. And so I think we're starting to see a bit of a shift of what that influencer and celebrity indicator could be. And especially for those creators and influencers, it's a due diligence process for themselves and the teams that kind of look after their brand, as to understanding what they're getting into and figuring out what is going to look like a successful long-term project, as opposed to something that might give them a good exposure as a celebrity into entering into Web3, but if the project isn't going to have longevity, or if it's not written well, then that can be really damaging to their brand as well.
No, that's a really interesting point, especially got kind of celebrities attaching their names. Where in the NFT space, think back to at least my simple definition of status goods. That makes a lot of sense. Where you see a lot of brands out there get celebrity people to represent their brand, and that's actually kind of part of what makes it valuable. But it also makes me think a little bit. So I have some context for this space. I previously did some work in the initial coin offering space, which you could say there's a lot of parallels with what's going on in the NFT market. A new exciting asset class, kind of a big rise in offerings and valuations. And what we saw back then was we actually had celebrities kind of endorsing some of these projects, but that actually, I would say, ultimately turned out to be kind of a bad thing. Because at least in terms of ICOs, what does a particular celebrity actually know about the underlying company or project that actually makes it credible? And there was also kind of other issues with ICOs that ultimately led them to be at least kind of killed that ICO boom in 2018. But the celebrity angle, I think, is a really interesting point that with the NFT space, it actually is much better fit.
Yep. I think there's a good segue into the kind of question around, when you are investing into NFT projects, what are some of the kind of project metrics that you could look at that would be indicators as to the success, and then what are some of the post metrics as to why you might be getting into a collection after it's actually launched. Joyce, do you have any thoughts on kind of the pre-launch metrics that you might be looking at as to what you would invest in?
I think in our space is, I think you probably already have a lot of information if you were able to be aware of a certain project pre-launch. I think that already kind of indicates you have a certain amount of access, right? Or have like a certain type of group of friends. So I think it's a little bit more rare to enter in that time. But I do see some projects where, I would look at the way they market their project. A lot of times when there's a new launch, the projects themselves would do something like, hey, if you have invite the next like 2 of their friends into the Discord, then that person automatically gets like a whitelist or something. I feel like that's a little bit less of an organic way to go about doing that. To me, that feels a little bit more marketing and maybe like less fundamental, right? There's nothing wrong with doing that, but I think it's really taking that all into context and, again, using your common sense to see if this is something that feels right or not.
For sure. And I can add, I know that you've got lots of points on the kind of post-launch metrics, but just to add to the kind of pre-launch, again, in terms of trends, we've seen a lot of undoxed teams launching NFT projects. And that's something that I think, like, at least for me, as an indicator as to this is a group of people that we don't know who they are. There is no social accountability. And we kind of can't follow up with them if something is to go wrong or if this is to turn into a rug pull. So that's normally one of the indicators I kind of look for before a project launches. And I think as well, like VC backing is obviously another great one in terms of the research process and in terms of looking into the partnerships that they have and if they've received investment from credible, well-known funds that have put their own name on the line and said, this is a group that we've met with. We've basically heard what their pitch is, and based off of our own research, we want to invest in these people. So it's kind of like a positive indicator when you do have that VC investing beforehand.
Yeah, and I think one thing I can add there is that, actually thinking back to some of my previous work on initial coin offerings, the paper we wrote actually had kind of a specific focus. But as part of that paper, we tried to kind of understand factors that predicted success in the ICO market. And very much the things you guys are talking about, did you have prior VC funding? Did you, use a KYC protocol? Things that just kind of indicate a certain amount of professionalism and also a certain amount of credibility seem to be things that would also predict success in that setting. But turning to the NFT market, so I admit that I'm a boring professor. I actually don't invest in NFTs. Instead, what I do is I study the people who do, and particularly one thing in our paper we find is that the experienced investors. So you look at any given launch and just say what percentage of those investors were experienced, and they seem to, that variable alone really seems to predict success in the NFT launch phase. And to me, that tells me that they're able to determine something about this collection, perhaps through due diligence or if whether or not they have VC funding. And part of being actually at this conference is I've really appreciated talking to people and getting a lot of ideas of maybe variables we could check and see whether or not those actually are the ones that help experienced investors make their decisions. But at least what I can say is that just looking at what they do, they seem to be pretty good at actually picking the collections that are very successful.
Cool. My next question is more around, I guess, regulation, which is a bit of a broad topic. Just wondering what both of your opinions are on the regulation of this particular market, whether you think it's necessary, maybe what it could look like to start protecting some of the retail investors that are coming in for the first time and probably not having the best experiences.
Can I take this one?
I mean, I have something to say.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
So I don't advocate for a particularly type of regulation. But I would say that, if you think about regulation, there should be, a reason to regulate. There should be kind of an objective in mind. And I think, once again, thinking back to the ICO time, I think there you had this issue where, these were ultimately many unregulated securities offerings. And the reason we have regulation in that space is precisely to protect retail investors. Now, I think the NFT space is a little bit different. But that being said, I think, perhaps, regulators looking at this space, if they have kind of ways to help put protections in there without necessarily, kind of killing the innovation or killing the actual space. I think that's kind of always the right balance that you'd like to achieve. as a regulator. So
Totally. And that, like, just around the kind of doxing and undoxing, I think is just like a basic, simple one that protects the consumer and puts a responsibility back on people that are kind of raising funds.
Yeah, so I just kind of want to put a I guess a different context to it, because I'm weary that we might be accidentally implying that NFTs are by default investment vehicles, right? They are potentially collector items, right? They may increase in value, they may decrease in value, just like anything else. But it's really up to the particular project and how each individual project is designed, and also how they're marketed, right? So from the legal perspective, obviously if something has kind of like a financial attribute, that is a bigger indicator that certain types of regulation should apply to it, right? But it also matters how something is marketed. Actually, it matters a great deal. So if someone says to you, buy this NFT project, you're gonna make a lot of money on it, that's bad, because it shouldn't be marketed that way, right? But alternatively, if there's a lot of utility that comes along with a project, is meant to be more of like a community building mechanism, and they do all of that, and the world finds it valuable, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So I think we all need to be careful how things are described in the world. I think it matters from, quote, like a community member perspective, whether something is going to be described to you as a potential investment or not. I think if it is, it's probably a negative sign, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about the kind of topic as we started coming together for the panel, and even the topic of investing in the right project is interesting, because people obviously think about investing with some kind of a financial return. But I think so much of the beauty of NFTs is that you are spending money on an asset, but the return that you're getting isn't always financial. It could be community, it could be experience, it could be access to networks. I mean, I think this event over the last couple of days has demonstrated the pure value that people that are a part of different NFT projects are receiving just by being a part of that community. And it's not a financial return, it's an experience.
It's also not a financial investment necessarily.
Yes.
I think, the amount of time in choosing what time to spend in what community is way more important, because you can always make more money, but we only have 24 hours in a day, and you really get the most value out of the project when you participate in it, right? So I think actually where to choose to spend your time, like which party within all the side events you want to go to, I think that's actually the bigger opportunity cost when you're making these decisions.
And I think one more thing to add, kind of a little bit on the regulatory side too, is just to make the point that markets also can self-regulate too, or there's kind of ways that it's not, you don't need an outside regulator to come in and say which projects are good or legitimate or anything. And in the NFT space in particular, goes within the set of 700 that we study, there's a really high failure rate. I think about half of our collections basically raise or mint very small percentage of their collection, and to me that says that investors are able to disentangle which collections are good or bad, or at least there's some mechanism where not every projects are easy to create in some sense, to actually put up a website and create the actual tokens themselves, but that's not necessarily going to fool everybody. And so I think that's another thing to keep in mind in terms of thinking how much regulation even would be needed.
Mm-hmm. For sure. In terms of NFTs and I guess the topic of investing in them and the right and good ones, there's so much of a focus often on the PFP space, but I'm interested if there are any of the other asset classes of NFTs that you guys are particularly interested in or kind of wanted to talk through a bit more.
Well, I think gaming is one of them, right? Gaming assets is super interesting, because there's the, just the art component. There's the how do you use it within the gaming component? How do you actually like stake something or use the land, right? There's so much going on. I guess maybe just put a pin on it. That is definitely an area to be watching.
Yeah, I was at Consensus 2 weeks ago, and it was really interesting hearing about the gaming world and how there's like a split apparently between gamers who are really anti NFTs and obviously ones that are now starting to kind of enter in. So I'm interested to see how as this space evolves, if it is something that like their audience does seem to adopt more when they've got such a strong, very public social stance kind of against the industry. Was there anything else, Sam, you want to add there?
No, I only study the profile picture collection, so I don't know much. I've learned a lot being here, but I don't have anything else to say about them. So
Yeah, we held an event as part of our launch 2 days ago, and we had 2 fashion NFT projects that came and spoke at our event, and it was really interesting to hear from them. I guess the utility that's being built out for fashion NFTs, and to me, it's wonderful to see how many women are starting to enter into the space and really identifying those as the kind of good projects that they're wanting to invest in. Some of the utilities they were talking about was with regards to influencers and influencer marketing, and the fact that content creators so often are sent packages of clothes that is obviously super wasteful, and it's often only worn kind of once or twice, if that. And so the digital fashion NFT industry has so much opportunity with those particular influencers to kind of market on. So that's definitely kind of a space that I'm interested in looking at. But I thought just before we kind of wrap things up, was there anything that you guys wanted to say in terms of like final remarks or particular projects that you're looking at?
So I'll just say that, I've shared with you, I think, some of our key findings, maybe a little bit. There's a lot more kind of in our paper, so I certainly encourage you to look me up, Sam Rosen, research website. You can find my work there. And I would just like to add that, I'm still trying to understand better kind of, factors of collection success or maybe variables we should be capturing. So if you have suggestions or hypotheses about things that should work, I'd love to talk to you about it. So definitely come talk to me later.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see how the current brands and existing companies integrate their NFT strategy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think starting with like all the fashion brands, everyone's basically launching some sort of NFT project.
Yes.
So, you're starting to have Lacoste do it. You're starting to have even just like food companies do it. I think Kraft had filed a few trademarks very recently for NFT related projects, right? So as NFTs become more or less the future of commerce, I think it'll be super interesting to see how people even go about discovering it. How you go about even analyzing which projects that you should spend time on or not, right? And this is actually what we're working on at Charisma Social. We've done a close alpha, so this is just like a short plug. So follow charisma_social to keep up to date on what we're working on, and we hope to be able to share some tools with you soon on how to go about doing that.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the final thing that I'll say on what I'm looking forward to in the world of NFTs is, as I kind of think on the problem of onboarding the next 10 million women into the space, I see a real power in the artists that are launching NFTs for their concerts. And the reason I think there's so much power there is because of their audience size and the fact that the value capture around a concert event is a big one that reaches many people. And seeing the likes of Doja Cat kind of launch that and how many people she had buy into her NFT was such a wonderful kind of clear example that I'm looking forward to, concert tickets being sold as NFTs and kind of seeing the power of that unleashed on millions of users and having them enter into kind of Web3 through that first time experience. We've got a minute and a half left. Are there any questions from the audience that anyone has for either three of us up here? Yes.
Sure. So we study a set of 700 profile picture collections that launched through October 2021. And so, that's a sample, right, where you have kind of the very early period and then you kind of have that big rush. And, the way I interpret that finding is not necessarily that a roadmap's a bad thing. I'm not trying to imply that having a roadmap makes your project less successful. I think it's just you look at it and you think, well, what types of projects kind of need a roadmap or what are they trying to do? And, it's in terms of thinking about, attracting investors, maybe it's a signal that says, oh, they're trying to draw us in with these lofty promises as opposed to maybe having other aspects that have brought people in. So that's the way I interpret that.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's also, just to share, it's counter to, well, not counter, but the experience of kind of raising capital for the wallet. So much of the feedback that we got was around having a roadmap, and we spoke about kind of an NFT collection that was going to be launched within the wallet. And there is such a pressure from venture to have that roadmap that I think that kind of filters through for projects when they're going public, that they need to share that roadmap to consumers because they're also going to want to know what that kind of future prospect is. So yeah, I definitely kind of see your point there. Okay, and we're on time. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.